Nathan Griffin was a single dad living in Erie, working as a yard and safety supervisor at Great Lakes Freight and Logistics. Before this, Nathan was a highly certified structural engineer. His wife Rachel, who was also an engineer, had flagged a structural fault in a warehouse frame. However, her project manager ignored the warning to meet a deadline, resulting in a fatal structural failure that claimed Rachel's life. Devastated, Nathan quit engineering, packed up his certifications, and chose a simple routine job at the shipping yard, where his mistakes wouldn't result in anyone's death. He lived a strictly structured life for his young daughter Sadie. Julia Hartman was the regional director of the same logistics company, meaning she had been Nathan's boss for over a year. She came from a prominent local shipping family, but always worked hard to prove herself based on merit, rather than her last name. Julia secretly admired Nathan's work ethic and competence from afar, which is why she spent an unusual amount of time down at the shipping terminal. The twist began when Megan, Nathan's friend from his daughter's soccer practices, insisted on setting him up on a blind date with her sister. Megan kept the details a complete secret, sharing only his first name with her sister. Coincidentally, Megan's sister was Julia. Neither Nathan nor Julia knew each other's last names outside of work, so they both agreed to the blind date without realizing who they were actually going to meet. When Nathan walked into the restaurant and found his assigned table, he froze mid-step. Sitting right across from him was Julia, his big boss. Both were absolutely stunned, but decided to stay, sit down, and talk. During the dinner, they broke the corporate ice. Nathan opened up about his tragic past, his engineering background, and why he chose to downscale his career to find peace. Julia shared her own struggles with corporate pressure and living under her family's shadow. By the end of the evening, a profound personal connection was formed, symbolized by a gentle moment where Julia silently slid the breadbasket closer to him, showing she truly understood his pain. However, as the night ended, they agreed that on Monday morning, they would return to being professional boss and employee. Monday arrived, and maintaining professional boundaries became immensely difficult for both of them. To make matters worse, Todd Bishop, the vice president of operations, was keeping a close eye on them. Bishop had been passed over for the director position that Julia received, and he was desperately looking for a reason to ruin her career and take her spot. The plot thickened when Nathan reviewed the equipment logs and noticed that a crucial safety inspection for Crane 4 had been deferred. Bishop had secretly signed off on this deferral to artificially cut maintenance costs and inflate his quarterly budget numbers in front of the board. Nathan flagged this to Julia, who immediately called a technical review meeting. In the meeting, using his old engineering expertise, Nathan pointed out deep structural fatigue in the crane's connector joint that a simple visual patch-up could not fix. Despite Bishop's angry outbursts, Julia sided with Nathan and ordered an immediate full teardown of the crane. That night, Nathan was approached by Walt Sanborn, a veteran yard crew manager who was just months away from retirement. Walt handed Nathan a secret personal notebook that he had hidden for years. It contained detailed records proving that Bishop had been forcing workers to falsify inspection documents for over 2 years to protect his own corporate bonuses and reputation. Realizing the immediate danger to human life, Nathan drove straight to Julia's house late that night. They stayed up until the early hours of the morning cross, referencing the secret logbook against company filings, fully confirming Bishop's corruption. Julia resolved to fully shut down the crane the very next morning. Before Julia's formal shutdown order could reach the floor the next morning, Bishop maliciously overrode the delay and pushed through an early cargo departure to protect his statistics. While walking the yard, Nathan heard the terrifying sharp groan of snapping metal coming from Crane 4. Instinct and his past trauma kicked in instantly. Nathan screamed at the dock hands, evacuating the entire swing radius just seconds before the main connector joint completely failed. The massive boom dropped 6 feet. But because of Nathan's swift actions, nobody was injured. Bishop arrived at the scene attempting to dismiss it as an unpredictable mechanical fault. However, Julia stepped in and confronted him in front of the entire crew, revealing that they had Walt's notebook and the digital timestamp proving Bishop had illegally overridden the shutdown order just an hour prior. 2 days later, an emergency regional board meeting was called. Sensing his imminent firing, Bishop played a dirty card. He attacked Julia and Nathan's credibility by revealing to the board that the regional director had been seen having a romantic dinner with her supervisor on Friday night. Julia did not flinch. She calmly looked at the board members and stated that her personal life had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that Bishop falsified safety documents for 2 years and risked lives on a spreadsheet. The board immediately voted to terminate Bishop and launch a full criminal investigation against him. Recognizing Nathan's extraordinary value, the board officially offered him a newly created executive role, giving him full authority over the district's infrastructure. Nathan looked at Julia, who gave him a supportive nod, and he accepted the job on the condition that all future inspection reports must bear the inspector's real name to ensure full accountability. A few days later, Megan found out through the local newspaper that the heroic supervisor who saved the shipyard was the exact same Nathan she had set up on the blind date. They all met at Megan's kitchen table, where they shared a laugh about how Megan didn't actually set up strangers, but rather forced 2 people who already respected each other to finally step out of their shells. Soon after, Julia properly met Nathan's daughter Sadie, and they bonded beautifully. 3 weeks later, Nathan and Julia returned to the same restaurant and sat at the exact same table. This time there was no corporate stress, secrets, or boundaries holding them back. Nathan gently placed his hand over Julia's, finally letting go of his heavy past, ready to build a beautiful future together. The transition into his new role as the Regional Safety and Structural Advisor was not just a change in title for Nathan. It was a return to the man he thought he had buried years ago. For the first few weeks, the weight of the silver badge in his pocket felt unfamiliar. But every time he walked past the newly repaired framework of Crane 4, he felt a quiet sense of peace. He was no longer running from his past. He was using it to protect the people around him. Julia noticed the change in his posture immediately. He no longer walked with his eyes fixed on the gravel of the yard floor. When he stood at the front of the Monday morning briefings, his voice carried the natural authority of a seasoned engineer. The dock workers, who had always respected him as a supervisor, now looked at him as the man who had saved their lives. Behind closed doors, the dynamic between the director and her advisor shifted into something seamless. They spent hours reviewing structural blueprints for the outer docks, their heads bent over the same desk, speaking a language of low distribution and stress points that only they fully understood. There were no more secrets, no more calculated distances, and no more fear of what the regional office might say. Todd Bishop's empty office down the hall stood as a silent reminder that honesty had finally won. The true test of their new reality came on a clear Saturday afternoon at the lakeside park. Nathan had arranged a small picnic, nervously packing a basket with the exact kind of sandwiches Sadie liked, while Julia arrived with a slight nervousness she hadn't felt since her first corporate board presentation. Sadie was sitting on top of the picnic table, her legs swinging back and forth, holding a fresh sketch pad. She looked at Julia with the fierce, protective curiosity that only a 9-year-old girl raised by a single father could muster. "Dad says you know everything about the big ships that come in from Canada," Sadie said, narrowing her eyes slightly. Julia smiled, sitting down on the bench opposite her. "I know how much they weigh, what they carry, and how hard it is to steer them when the lake gets rough. But your dad is the one who makes sure they don't crash into the docks." Sadie considered this for a long moment, looking from Julia to her father, who was watching them intensely from the grill. A slow, approving smile broke across the little girl's face. She slid her latest drawing across the wood. It was a picture of a massive freighter, drawn in bright blue and green crayons, featuring 4 giant sails. "Real freighters don't have sails," Sadie explained proudly. "But I added them because they look faster. Dad said you could keep my last drawing, so you have to keep this one too. It goes in the big bag, not your pocket." Julia took the paper, folding it with a reverence that touched Nathan deeply. As she tucked it safely into her leather bag, Nathan caught her eye from across the grass. The unspoken understanding between them grew even stronger. Julia wasn't just stepping into his life. She was carefully making space for his daughter. The following Sunday, Megan officially called a family dinner at her house to celebrate Nathan's promotion and the final conclusion of the company investigation. The atmosphere in the dining room was loud, warm, and filled with the scent of roasted chicken, a stark contrast to the sterile corporate world Nathan and Julia inhabited during the week. Megan stood at the head of the table, pouring lemonade with a triumphant smirk that she had been wearing for 7 days straight. "I just want it noted for the record," Megan announced, pointing a wooden spoon at her sister. "For 14 whole months, you two walked past each other every single day. You exchanged clipboards. You argued about shipping manifests, and it took me 20 minutes on the soccer bleachers to realize you were perfect for each other." "You didn't know his last name, Megan," Julia reminded her, laughing as she reached for the salad bowl. "If you had told me I was going to dinner with Nathan Griffin, I would have spent the entire Friday night hiding under my bed, trying to figure out how to resign. And if I knew I was meeting Director Hartman," Nathan added, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth, "I would have worn a tie and spent 3 hours practicing my formal corporate greetings instead of wearing a wrinkled shirt." Megan waved her hand dismissively, sitting down next to Sadie. Details. The point is, my radar is flawless. You two just take a very long time to see what's right in front of your faces." Sadie, Tell your Aunt Julia that she owes me half of her next paycheck for matchmaking services. Sadie giggled, shaking her head. Aunt Megan, Dad says you just like to boss people around. The laughter that filled the room was light, easy, and entirely free of the shadows that had followed Nathan for 3 long years as the summer began to cool into early autumn. The routine of their lives found a beautiful, steady rhythm. They worked hard during the day, kept their professional boundaries clear in front of the regional staff, and spent their evenings building a quiet life around Sadie's school schedule and soccer games. On the anniversary of their first year working together under the new system, Nathan made a reservation at the small restaurant by the waterfront. When the hostess led them through the dim, candlelit room, she automatically brought them to table 7, right by the large window overlooking the dark waters of Lake Erie. The waiter approached, recognized them with a warm nod, and placed 2 glasses of water on the white cloth before leaving them to look at the menus. Julia looked out at the distant lights of the shipping terminal. The silhouettes of the massive cranes stood like silent sentinels against the night sky. For the first time in her entire career, looking at the yard didn't bring a sense of corporate anxiety or pressure. It just felt like home. She turned back to the table and placed her hand flat against the white linen, palm upward. Nathan looked at her hand, then up at her face. The candlelight caught the steady, unhurried confidence in her eyes. 3 years ago he had promised himself he would never build anything permanent again, terrified that the foundation would crumble and leave him broken a second time. But looking at Julia, he realized that some structures weren't built of steel and concrete. They were built of shared truth, quiet courage, and the willingness to carry a heavy load together. He reached across the small distance and laced his fingers through hers, his grip firm and warm. Outside, the autumn wind whipped across the lake, rattling the restaurant windows and sending waves crashing against the stone breakwater. But inside, at table 7, the weather was perfectly calm, and neither of them had to brace against the storm anymore. Months bled into a year, and the Erie terminal transformed from a place of cold logistics into a model of safety and community across the Great Lakes region. Nathan's new system of absolute accountability, where every safety report required a real, non-anonymous signature, spread to 3 other major districts. The culture of cutting corners to chase corporate numbers was entirely dismantled. One brisk evening, as the first winter frost began to settle on the cranes, Nathan stood with his clipboard beside Crane 4. Walt Sanborn, wearing a brand new retirement watch and a heavy winter coat, walked up to join him. "You really did it, Nathan," Walt said, looking up at the freshly reinforced steel joints of the crane. "You gave this place its conscience back. I can finally enjoy my retirement knowing the boys down here are going home safe every night." "We did it, Walt," Nathan replied, shaking the older man's hand firmly. "Your notebook was the foundation. I just did what any good engineer is supposed to do. I fixed the structure before it could fall." From the top of the main terminal office stairs, Julia stepped out into the crisp air, wrapping her wool coat tightly around herself. She caught Nathan's eye and offered that familiar, proud, steady smile. There was no longer any need to hide their bond or look over their shoulders. The entire company knew that the director and her chief advisor were an unbreakable team, both on the floor and in life. The story that had started with tragedy and isolated routines finally found its permanent anchor. By the following spring, Nathan and Julia bought a small, sturdy house on the Erie waterfront. A place with a large kitchen table big enough for family dinners with Megan, and a wide-open view of the lake where the great ships traveled. On a warm weekend afternoon, Nathan walked into the living room to find Sadie and Julia sitting side by side on the floor. Spreads of colored pencils and technical drawing sheets were scattered across the rug. "Look, Dad," Sadie called out, holding up a brand new blueprint. "Julia is teaching me how real hull designs work. But I still added 3 sails to the cargo ship." Julia laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she looked up at Nathan. "I told her that 3 sails might defy standard aerodynamics for a modern vessel, but she insists it gives the ship personality. I didn't have the heart to overrule her." Nathan sat down on the floor beside them, pulling them both into a quiet embrace. For 3 long years after Rachel died, his world had been entirely gray, held together only by strict rules and a refusal to feel anything new. But looking at the 2 incredible women beside him, he realized that a life with love was always worth the risk. He had spent years trying to avoid mistakes, but the beautiful twist of fate that Megan had thrown his way proved that some surprises were meant to save you. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted Lake Erie in deep shades of gold and violet, Nathan, Julia, and Sadie walked down to the shoreline. The wind off the water was strong and fresh, blowing away the last remnants of the past. Hand in hand, they stood together on the shore, no longer bracing against the storm, but ready to sail into a bright, beautiful, and limitless future. If you loved this emotional journey of healing, justice, and second chances, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, Solo Dad Stories, for more incredible stories just like this one.